Ashour from the Theology of the Body evangelization team. Why am I here in a tunnel? Because I want to start my talk by telling you about this true story, because all the stories I tell are true. This one time, I was in Rome with a couple of friends, and we went to the catacombs in Rome. And I know these are not the catacombs, but this is as close as we could get here in Dallas, Texas. And we went, but the catacombs were locked. We couldn't get in. So my friend Ray and I said, let's just walk around the front ground and see if we could find our way in. And Marcia said, no, I'm going to just stay up above ground. So we walked around, and then we found this door into this sort of sacristy. So we went in, and then we found this other door, and it led straight down into the catacombs. So we looked at each other, and we nodded, and we went in. And we went around and around, and we searched, and we remembered that the early Christians would sometimes have to go down there to have Mass said. We remembered how the early Christians sometimes died for their faith. And we also remembered how some of the early Christians would get lost because the catacombs are about 18 miles long. So, after we saw the statue of St. Cecilia, we went on and we retraced our steps back and we knew where to go. But then we went back and they turned the lights out. Of course, there were no lights in the early Christian church, but the lights were out. I put my hand in front of my face. I could not see a thing. But my friend Ray said, don't worry, we know our way back. Let's retrace our steps back. So we tried to retrace our steps back. We tried to retrace our steps back. No, we got lost. We could not find our way out. So then Ray said, Monica, whistle, whistle. So I whistled. And yes, it worked. My friend Marcia, meanwhile, was upstairs, up above ground, and she was trying to convince the Italian men that we were down there. He said, no, they were closed. So then the Italian man heard my whistle, and then he was able to listen to me, and I was screaming, Marcia, Marcia, and they finally found me. And it's true that the Italian man slapped me. He said I could go to jail, and I said, sorry. And then he gave us a grand tour of the catacombs. And I live to tell you the story now. And why do I start my talk on Theology of the Body in the catacombs, with the catacomb story? Because I think sometimes that you high schoolers feel like you are in the darkness, and that you don't know a way out, that you might feel trapped. I am here to give you the message of Pope John Paul's Theology of the Body, which is revolutionary, and it will help you to have a guide like that Italian man. It might sometimes be a little rough, but you can live out the Theology of the Body and not be in darkness anymore. This is a message of hope. Let me summarize all the stuff that we've talked about so far. And then after that, I'd like to talk to you about the Mass. So remember, we talked about how the body reveals the person, like gestures and expressions and stuff. And then the body reveals God. First of all, by the fact that we are not like orcs and those ugly Play-Doh drawing, figurines, because we were meant to be enemies if we were like that. Instead, we have arms and legs to help each other and hug each other, to be gifts. And when we are gifts, then we are like God, because the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are always gifts to each other. And then the second way that the body reveals God is that there is masculinity and femininity. And so that's God's way of telling us, I want you to be attracted to the opposite sex, treat the other person with great love and dignity, and then maybe you'll fall in love, get married, and form a family. And by forming a family, you're like God, who is the utmost family, the first family, Pope John Paul says. And by the way, those of you who are guys, and you can discern the priesthood. In that way, why do we call the priest Father? Because he's the father of our big family. And we need you guys to discern that. And you young women, the convent life, I lived there for 1 year discerning. I mean to tell you, it was like one big long slumber party, with of course prayers and things like that, but it was so wonderful. I was called away to give you this talk, and maybe you will be open to discerning that. And by being in such a community, then you are like God. So Pope John Paul also mentions how religious life is also a sign of union, and our union ultimately with God. So then, after we talked about the body reveals the person, the body reveals God, we talked about how holiness is body and soul being integrated. That the body and soul ought to always be reflective of each other. So our pure heart ought to have bodily actions that correspond and reveal who we are. And then we talked about the thing that unbees us, like kind of splitting our bodies and souls when we do the opposite of what we know is right. But then how Jesus can bring us back. And then, don't forget, we also talked about the fact that using is the opposite of love. Not hatred, but using. Then we got to the rough, tough, and buff bodies, the guys, protect and provide. And then the girls. Our hiding and inviting bodies tell us to welcome and to care for others. Boy, that was a lot we covered. But I hope that you really start living out the theology of the body, because you will have hope and healing and happiness.